right, is everyone ready? Sounds good. I'll call this April 4th work session to order. Go right into roll call.
Dr. Campley?
Here.
Mr. Dorr? Here. Mrs. Evans-Brockett?
Here.
Mr. Fountain?
Here.
Mr. Keenan?
Here.
Dr. Kohler?
Here.
Mrs. Mayers?
Here.
Mr. Saylor?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here.
Thank you very much. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One point oh four, the approval of the agenda. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor? Any questions, discussions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Against, nay? And the ayes have it. We'll move on to comments on any topic. There is no one that's listed that they want to speak at the beginning of the meeting, so I'll just offer out, is there anyone in person that is looking to speak? Seeing none, and is there anyone on Zoom that is looking to speak? Well, we have someone in person, okay.
I'm the one that mentioned at the end. I might as well.
Mrs. Dixon, yes.
Go ahead and be at the beginning.
Sure.
I was not sure what would be most best for your agenda and what you had planned. Good evening, thank you. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. I'm Jennifer Dixon. I've been an employee here at PV since 2003. First hired on as girls tennis coach, and quickly thereafter through our community education started a tennis program. My background is being a full-time tennis pro from the private sector prior to coming here, and definitely wanted to come and bring my talents to the plates here for PV, and have been doing so now for 2 decades. I don't think you'll find anyone that's more passionate about our tennis program, our tennis courts, our facilities. Back to when we were behind the hill on our kind of AstroTurf sand tennis courts before this facility was even built. And even back then when Dr. Fear was our superintendent at the time, knowing my background not just as a tennis player, having played all around not just the United States, Europe, Canada, Central America, all over. She knew my background in the tennis industry, with club industry, running activities, running junior programs, special events. She knew that I wore many hats within the tennis. So when this facility was being built, she, definitely gave me a ring and was very forthcoming, and appreciated her giving me the respect and the attention for, hey, what do you think? And if we did the courts this way, and, some of my input and so forth. And this was before everything was laid down and definite, and it was real exciting to see that we were getting such a nice tennis facility. As you know, or maybe don't know, obviously with 12 courts, it's given us the luxury to run all of our PAC tournaments that we have. Tennis is kind of a different sport than most other sports, where it's not just one team playoff. It goes through a singles tournament, and then a doubles tournament, and then also team tournaments. So there's kind of a threefold at the end of a typical team season that keeps us on those courts, beyond the normal dates and weather permitting and so forth. Not only are we the home for the PAC tournaments, we're also the home for many of our district tournaments, and when the teams are having to play each other, they're looking for a neutral ground, and because we have the court space to use, it's been the perfect venue for us to host, and it's been, again, my honor. I've worn the hat as the USTA tournament director, running these tournaments for the past 20 years here on these courts. So again, tennis is definitely my cup of tea. Several months ago, obviously in February, I had to get in. I've been running a tennis program through the community education here for 19 of those 20 years, and successfully and pretty much single-handedly. I haven't had any assistant instructors or anyone. There was only one summer where I had to get some knee surgery that I had an assistant coach kind of fill in for me. Other than that, it's been me and solely me. As a paraprofessional is my full-time job here at PV, working with special ed students, and have been, again, for the past 20 years. So it came much to my surprise when I got an email from, it started kind of with Jen Letty, who was kind of our receptionist, and as you know, that position there is usually kind of my go-to person through community ed, who I turn my timesheets in, doing the approval of my classes, you know, as I start planning every year, all the registration, so we work, you know, closely hand in hand. She gave me the heads up that, hey, Jen, already had my summer program approved, it's already advertised through the community ed, and just to let you know, the courts are going to be getting some repairs done, and I hear this summer. And I said, well, is this going to affect my summer program at all? Immediately I was assured, no, your summer program has been approved, it's going. It spurred me to immediately send an email to Mr. Weaver, knowing he's my facility director, to say, hey, you know, heads up, I've got my summer program, I'm getting wind that the courts are getting some repairs done. And he said he would keep me in the loop, that there was nothing really much, you know, going on as far as that said. End of season, as a head coach, obviously we do our end of season report. We, you know, give the athletic director the full run of all the answers to all the questions that they ask. And in that is, you know, planning and progressing for, you know, what's coming up and so forth. And in that, I have had at least 15 years of season review paper trails from Mr. Glansky, our previous athletic director, and so forth, where I have continuously been persistent on bringing to attention safety issues on the tennis courts. Since the courts were built, there has been basically no maintenance to the courts. They have not been washed.
I appreciate if you, normally, and I apologize to the rest of the board as well.
Sorry.
Each public speaker gets 3 minutes to speak. I thought you were speaking on behalf of the admin as part of an agenda item.
Oh, sorry.
So I apologize
If
about that.
That's, and again, you let me know when and where it would be more appropriate. If this is too long-winded for now, I'm happy to step back and address when it's more appropriate.
Well, each public speaker gets allotted 3 minutes. I know there'll be discussion today on an agenda item for the tennis courts that the board will.
Okay.
Well,
I didn't
we'll
realize
debate.
there was a 3-minute time limit. I'm sorry. That was the ding, and I had no idea.
Thank you.
This is my first time speaking.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Shall I close or end it from here?
Yes, if you could just end it from there. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear what, like, she didn't know, but what
Sure.
does she want?
My-
Stay, like,
Yes,
you're here?
yes, I am here to show objection to the bottom 4 courts, any of our courts being turned into permanent pickleball courts of any markings or of any such.
Got it.
All
Thank you very much.
right, thank you.
No one on Zoom still? Anyone else in the public? All right, we have a special presentation for the education plan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. What I'm sharing this evening is really just an overview of the special education plan. I know it has been mentioned before in our annual special education presentation last month. So what I've presented to the board is the draft plan, which was attached, I believe, in the board docs so that you have access to the actual plan itself. And just a reminder that the actual process for the special education plan, it has been a series of committee meetings from October through March. We've also simultaneously been moving through the cyclical compliance monitoring process, which again began in September, concluded, excuse me, the actual process itself concluded in February with the on-site visit, And from this point through the end of the school year, we will be following up with the Bureau of Special Education with meetings to review the data from that process. And again, that process consisted of some data collection, surveys, the on-site visit, and then the post-monitoring meetings that will be occurring. This evening, we're presenting the draft, and then we will move through, if the board approves it, upon board approval, it will go out for public comment for 28 days, and then come back to the board for final approval, following any comments, any corrections, anything that we need to adjust. And then after final Board of School Director approval, it will be submitted to PDE. And it's due to PDE by July 30th of 2022. Again, this slide really just reminds you of that. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is an update. So we held our last committee meeting, I believe, on March 16th. Then the next day, we received the update from PDE. We originally thought that this plan would take us through the 2023, till the end of 2023, and that next school year, we would be moving through this exact same process. What we learned from the state is we are a Phase 3 school, and this actual plan will last through till the end of the 23-24 school year. So during the 23-24 school year, we will come back and do the next cycle plan, which will then run July 1, 2024 through June 30th of 2027. So again, that's a change from last month when I presented to the board. We thought this plan would be in place for 1 year. It will actually be in place for 2 school years. And the information in this plan reflects that information. Next slide, please. Again, a reminder of the components that are contained within here. Now, many of these elements are really data-driven, and if they're not data-driven, it's a series of questions that the district is then required to provide a narrative response. The first 2 areas are the 2 components, the areas of improvement in planning and significant disproportionality. Those were a series of data points that we needed to review, and there were no areas that required corrective action or any, reflection and then planning for an action plan. And then the others were really a series of questions and then narratives that we needed to respond to, which again are in the plan. The bulk of the plan, probably 100 pages, it's a 130-page document. 100 pages consist of really identification of the education plans, which means we have to identify caseloads by our teachers and really account for all of our students that receive special education supports and services. That's one piece, and then the next piece to that is really approval of facilities. So we have to identify all of the spaces that serve for special education programming, and they need to be approved by the state. So again, all of that information is in there. There's a series of questions that we have to provide assurances that classrooms are located within the natural ebb and flow of a building, that they consist of the proper size to accommodate students and such. And again, you will see that within the plan. And then the last elements are really the special education, the personnel development, and there's 7 categories in this plan that we need to address, and then outline the types of professional learning opportunities that we will provide, and that they need to then cover the course of this plan. So we've identified those elements for the next 2 school years within this plan. Just a reminder again of the data points that are contained. We pulled from the cyclical compliance monitoring information, as well as the special education data report, which is that off of the December 1 count. And just screenshots of what that educational program and the special education facilities looks like within the plan. And you can see the assurance check that we have to identify, a series of, I think, 5 statements that we have to respond to. And then again, just an overview of the purpose of the plan is to review and analyze our data, describe the programming that we offer, make sure that all of our classrooms are approved by the Bureau of Special Education, and then to set the professional learning targets. So that's what's contained within this plan. And I don't know, I'm here if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer them at this point.
Doesn't look like any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Student Liaison Report, Mr. Matt Schaefer.
Good evening. Christian is not with me tonight. He's actually in Puerto Rico doing some charity work. He can tell you all about that next week. he tried to explain it to me. I don't know what it is, but it sounds very cool, and like he's doing some great stuff down there. Super proud of Christian. I don't have a whole lot tonight. I can tell you though, today in sports, all of our sports teams, softball, baseball, and lacrosse, won all of their varsity and junior varsity games. So that's a big highlight. The play, the musical, the 25th annual Putnam Spelling Bee just ended a couple days ago, and I heard it was fantastic. I didn't get a chance to watch it. Huge regret, because I heard it was one of the best musicals we've done in a while. I'm sure anybody that went can attest to that, but just a huge shout out to the crew and everybody who helped put that together. Our musical department is phenomenal, something that we don't often see because it only happens maybe 3 times a year, but we have a phenomenal drama department. I don't have much else. I do want to, and I think I can speak for the entire student body here in paying my respects to Trooper Brandon Siska. He graduated in 2010, which is when I was in kindergarten. But it's crazy to me that we were, in PV at the same time. Once a Viking, always a Viking. So just our thoughts as a student body are with his family and the entire law enforcement community. It was a big loss in the community, but to see Perk Valley rally together, that was really special. So that's all I've got from the student side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schaefer. I have no president's report this week. Superintendent's report, Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. So this evening, I'd like to also echo some of what Mr. Schaefer has mentioned regarding community partnerships with respect to a community that united this weekend in response to the funeral and in providing a venue for the funeral services for Brandon Siska. I'd also like to talk about the value as part of our comprehensive plan around safe and supportive schools and student engagement in some of the musicals that also took place in the month of March. Our path to health and wellness, and what else April brings before the end of the month. And here we are in April already. So we talk about the values that right now are identified in our comprehensive plan and that guide us as a school district. It's preparing our students to be future ready. It's accommodating our students with safe and supportive school communities, and it's engaging in partnerships with those in our community. And the funeral service that occurred this weekend on Saturday was quite remarkable and truly, as Mr. Schaefer mentioned, a testament to the community that we are and coming together. I am very thankful to the individuals that helped to organize for this funeral service. I was honored to be in attendance. Governor Wolf was here with his wife, as were many state troopers, police, and fire persons, first responders. It was really quite an event. The ceremonial aspects of it, the formality of it, were really impressive and awesome. We had quite a crowd. This was the left-hand side of the competition gym. It was filled with the state troopers. They also sat on the floor. This was the right-hand side of the competition gym. On the floor were family and close friends. On this side of the competition gym, which is where, I happen to be seated, were the first responders that were not state troopers but served as fire persons or police officers. Here's Governor Wolf with a state trooper having presented the wife of Brandon Siska with the flag, an American flag. And 2 of our students, Ava DiFiore and Brandon Flagett, presented just a beautiful song, Rise Up, and it really was wonderful. If you have a chance and you're interested, I would strongly encourage you to listen or view the services, on the video that's been produced by the Pennsylvania State Police, by the state actually, and there's a link here to it. But our students just did a wonderful job, and it was very moving. So in thanks, I want to recognize all that supported. Mr. Dean Miller really organized this event. He happens to be close friends with Mr. Siska and his family. He was also a police officer for a very long time in a local community, and he organized the event in collaboration with the state police, who have very specific approaches that they put into place for such ceremonies. But it incorporated host ushers and security, our kitchen team. We had food service, employees that were supporting up in the cafeteria, a hospitality area, if you will. We had Operations Department led by Mr. Fabrizio, who also really went above and beyond to make sure that our building was in tip-top shape and made a good impression, and I heard lots of positive feedback about that. Our grounds and custodial crews worked overtime, really around the clock, to get the building ready. And technology team was very supportive of the technology efforts of the state police, and they were on site Saturday. Lots of our PV admin and staff were on site Saturday. They served as ushers. Mrs. Hurd was there. Mr. Ganesh was there. Mr. Santiago was there. Lots of us around the table, and others in different buildings and in different positions in our district were there, and it was a really nice community effort. We also borrowed equipment from the prison. We borrowed a few golf carts, and that was also very helpful just to shuttle people. There were quite a few people that had parked a distance away. So thank you to all in our community for honoring this young man. And I mentioned to the cabinet team this morning, as I was sharing with them, Brandon Siska, as we learned about Brandon, was really representative of the profile of a PV graduate. When you learn about Brandon, he was 29 years old and had become a volunteer fireman at 16 while in high school and continued that service through college and graduate school. He went on and got his master's. So he learned about, he studied criminal justice, and he learned about emergency management and leadership as part of his master's, and all the while continued to serve as a volunteer fire person. Then he decided he wanted to be a police officer, and he went into the academy and he became a Montgomery County police officer. And upon graduation from that training, he served part-time while then serving as a paid fire person for Upper Providence before deciding to go into the State Police Academy. He graduated, finished up in August, was employed in August, and then was tragically killed in March. So, but when you hear about Brandon, he also was the fire chief of the Trap Fire Company, very young to be in that position. And there were individuals who spoke about his leadership already, his collaborative approach, his team approach, his vision for the department, his forward thinking, and his ability to get people to follow him. So really, some wonderful things that were shared about this individual, and it just resonated for me that he was somebody that others would really look up to. So our thoughts are with his family. Very tragic event. Hopefully, family and friends felt some level of comfort on behalf of what the district could offer them in terms of a venue. Otherwise, I can't imagine what they're going through, but I thank all that came together to support this effort, a true community effort. As we transition to talk about some of the events for our students, we continue to focus on safe and supportive schools. We want to engage our students in school. That's gone really well so far this year. Musical season was upon us. East performed Seussical in February. West performed High School Musical Junior in March. It was a great production. The West venue is a really nice venue because you're closer to the stage, a little bit smaller. The kids did a great job, really awesome, and it's amazing how comfortable they are on stage when they perform. This was a great show. And then, as Mr. Schaefer mentioned, we had the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee performed this weekend. Right over here, we have Dr. Campley's daughter. And we had our own Mr. Christian Seibel here, had a main part also, and the kids really did a great job. Here's some close-up photos from some of the students that starred in the show. And again, had some humor to it. They brought up some guest spellers, you know, that was kind of neat for the people that participated. And again, I am in awe of some of what our students have to offer and how comfortable they are on the stage in the venue at East. Great job to our kids. As we think about safe and supportive schools, a subcommittee of the Wellness Committee has been working on what else we can think about doing to support our students on our path to health and wellness, and really getting kids back, getting our staff back to something closer to that normal we know. We are planning a path to health and wellness sort of symposium. It's a little bit different. It's not really a symposium in that it's not offered in a big venue at one time, but we are planning excuse me, over the course of 3 weeks, some different presentations to try and reach our community with information that they might benefit from. Beginning the week of April 18th, I'm not going to take us back to August, April 18th, we will start with building community, respectful interactions, and the district will actually present information on social media. I'm calling that Social Media 101. We also have an opportunity to work with an author on the book, The Rabbit Effect. You may have heard about this book. One of our principals is leading a book study. We have some community members participating in a book study. Excuse me. It's really about positive attitudes, positive approaches, kindness, and again, building community. Each week, the week of April 18th, the week of April 25th, and the week of May 2nd, we're going to sprinkle in some activities that really are informative, all virtual, for our families. So the first week is really about building communities, respectful interactions. We want to try and share with our community some of the ways our students can consider non-bullying type approaches. We have some challenges in that area. We want to talk about healthy social media use. That second week is really about substance use, and we want to inform our families of some of the most up-to-date information around marijuana, THC, CBD. And then that last week, we'll focus on anxiety and depression. And in each of these weeks, there are individuals that will present some basic information in an effort to meet our community where it is and try and leave them feeling better informed and hopefully wanting more. We'll have a resource fair on May 18th, where we will have a speaker and some on-site opportunity to touch base with some resources available in our community. We'll start to market this this week. This is a link to a full schedule, but just to give you a sense of what we're planning in our efforts to really make sure we reach out and connect with our community in these ways to support them. This is some of the information about what's to come. At the same time, we're presenting to our community these virtual sessions, if you will, 1 or 2 a week. We'd also like to align some activities in school for our students. So we're working with principals about what might be possible. One example, that first week is No One Eats Alone in the Lunchroom. This is a national program. We've actually considered it in the past, and it's a way to prompt thinking on the part of our students about that setting, that lunchroom setting, and sometimes when students unfortunately end up in a less than comfortable position. We want to be aware of that, and we want to work to address that when we can. April also brings with it a big community day that's being planned under the leadership of Dr. Clune and Mrs. Lofton, and it will engage the Delaware tribe, the Lenape Indians, on our property and showcase that Arboretum to be, if you will, and engage all who are interested in a welcome home feast. That's April 10th here on our campus. And then the great news for our students and staff, we have a spring break that begins April 13th and extends through that Monday, April 18th. People are looking forward to that, especially when we have such wonderful days like today, beautiful weather. And then we'll wind down the month, kicking off PSSAs, and they'll continue into May. And then we have keystones that come up in May. So the end of the year also brings with it those standardized tests that our students move through, and we'll support them as best we can through that process as well. And with that, that ends my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Subers, Solicitor's Report?
I have no report.
No report, okay. Board members participate actively in the committees. Available minutes of notes and committees activities are included in the agenda items, also on board docs for anyone that's interested. Do any board members have anything of note to report? Mr. Dorr?
On the 24th, we had the Safety and Operations meeting. We had an ESCO update by Phil Mowry. We had a fantastic presentation by some seniors that have a composting idea for the high school. Pickleball update. We had updates on grounds, RFQ on the greenhouse, Lenape update, high school auditorium update, card access project, which is on the agenda this evening, as well as the Keenan Stadium scoreboard, tennis court discussions. We had an update by Mr. Fabrizio about operations, an update on safety with Mr. Miller, about radio upgrades, traffic study, walkability bike study, and planning commission, and Mr. Ganesh did a technology update.
Thank you.
Next meeting is on the 21st.
I'll give a quick policy. Policy meeting was really short, about 6.5 minutes to 8.5 minutes. But I know the upcoming policy meeting, look out for the agenda as that comes up, because there are some students that are bringing some policy items to the next policy meeting. I also know that a PNN went out on March 31st. At the end of the month, that's quite lengthy. That'll probably be brought up at the policy meeting as well. And our next upcoming policy meeting is April 19th. Probably going to be longer than 6.5 minutes. Dr. Campley?
Yes, the Education Committee met on March 30th. I won't go into a whole lot because we do have an education presentation in a little bit, but some of the major points was technology interactive panels. That topic was brought up, and the idea of needing to purchase some more in the elementary and high schools and looking at leasing versus purchasing. Summer enrichment camps were discussed, and the option of, what the charge may be to families. There was math resources was also discussed, and it looks like the STAR reading program will be the one that is recommended. We talked a little bit about the mental health resources. We have some funds left, so we want to brainstorm some ideas. And then some possible course changing at the high school, so dropping math, academic math, and adding a couple of different courses for humanities. And our next meeting is 4/27.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Keenan?
Yes, on March 23rd, I attended the MCIU board meeting down in Norristown. There was a presentation on the Virtual Life Skills Program, which only has about, I think, 8 current people attending virtually, but very worthwhile. The board approved the appointment of Jeff Cardwell as the school safety and security coordinator. Following 2022-23 budgets were approved: non-public targeted safety schools initiative, business education partnership, non-public professional development, and the student services budget and fee schedule. Let's see, moving down. What else happened? Some updates to staffing down there. Staffing is a big thing going on, part of the pandemic and recovering from it. 1 professional development request was received, 12 new employees, 8 resignations, 10 retirements. 1 professional contract was awarded to Kerry Duke, case manager. Also, we extensively discussed, it didn't make it into these notes, we extensively discussed, I think this is important just to pass on, minimum wage issues and getting qualified employees based on the minimum wage that you're offering and competing with other industries and school districts and schools and everything like that. Just know that we spent like a while discussing that. Yeah, the MCIU did regular approvals of contracted service agreements to school districts such as ourselves, so that they'll continue to provide training programs and services. And just a reminder that Earth Day is coming up April 22nd, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Dr. Kohler?
So the Wellness Committee met in March, and I won't spend too much time on it because Dr. Russell mentioned a lot of this in her report, but we were talking about ways to make sure we allocate some ESSER funds to mental health and wellness. And during that discussion, we really focused on some key areas such as bullying, substance use, anxiety, depression, and how can we address these. And so out of that conversation came this idea of having a subcommittee to do the Mental Health and Wellness Symposium, which is turning into our Path to Wellness. So that is underway, and Dr. Campley, Mr. Fountain, and I have been on that subcommittee and have just been getting really excited for what we can offer our community, and I think it's a good use of ESSER funds. We also talked about, since we allocated some ESSER funding to the new fitness center improvements, how can we balance that out and also allocate some funding towards our arts and music program. So more to come on that, and our next meeting is on May 18th.
Great, thank you. Mayor's?
March 21st, we had North Monco Technology Center meeting, and the 3 things that I really took away from the meeting was, first, that there's a group of students and an instructor there who are starting a new initiative They're working on installing EV chargers, which are car charging stations for electric cars. Really impressive initiative. They're looking for grants. They're installing everything themselves. They're looking at having these stations so that you could drive up and they can charge the public to use them. And apparently there aren't any charging stations around quite a distance that are for public use. So really pretty awesome initiative by the students and the teacher there. The restaurant is now open for business. That happened on March 30th. The budget was passed, and it was passed below the Act 1 index, which is a great thing. And the next meeting is April 20th.
Thank you.
Just a note to add to that, I was also at the meeting and was asked after the meeting if I would be able to represent as part of their steering committee for the North Monco comprehensive planning process that's starting.
They got you to go to another meeting. Ms. Evans-Brockett?
Finance Committee was held last week. I won't go into any details because Mr. Weaver will be reporting on that. Our next meeting will be on April 28th. From a legislative perspective, there's a lot being considered right now, including some bills regarding vouchers, transgender athletes bill, and charter school regulations.
Great. I actually, I am going to be going to the April 25th legislative session in Harrisburg. There's a PSBA legislative session on April 25th that I'll go to that I look forward to reporting back to the board. I don't know if anyone else is going, but I look forward to reporting back thereafter. Just a reminder well, first of all, thank you to the board members and the admin. The executive minutes are great, and the work that the board members do in all these committee meetings is much appreciated. To the community, again, this is where the product gets made, in these committee meetings, right? And they're open to the public. They're available on Zoom when it works, and appreciate everyone's time there. Looking for the following items will be added to the consent for approval agenda for tonight, or for the April 11th business meeting, 7.01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8.01, 2, 3, and 4. Moving on to education, Mrs. Mayers.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. 4.01, it's an education update.
Good evening, everyone. So this evening in April, we have 4 topics to share with you. A little bit about Chromebooks, secondary math resource, some updates on ESSER, and then we'll end with our enrollment and staffing projections. So start out with Chromebooks and our digital transformation. We have added information from the draft that was sent out at the end of last week. I really wanted to start out with a why. Why did we embark upon a digital transformation several years ago, and why do we continue to support the desire to purchase Chromebooks for our students? I mean, you can see lots of different circles here on the screen. I'll just point out a couple of them. When we embarked upon this, we really felt that having a common device for all of our students provided an equitable access to learning environments for our students. It also, we're really in that era of trying to move our students from just simple engagement to transformation, and to, thank you, threw me off there, that's okay. And to, instead of just consuming content, but to becoming a producer of that content and being able to share and learn beyond the walls of their classroom and out into the world, which they can do through a computer. They can learn through that, they can share what they have created. We're also looking to ensure that our students are future ready. And if you think about the jobs that are available and the work that is happening out in our workforce, really students need to be able to utilize a device, be able to collaborate virtually. Also, another key piece here is these devices allow us to have differentiation and accommodations for students that are seamless and that are not as noticeable. So if somebody needs large print or they need read to text, those things are available very easily through a device that in the past would have required a human resource to provide to them and really would have stood out. You can see others on there, but those were a couple that I really wanted to point out to you in terms of the why that we're moving forward, or we're recommending that for you. On the next slide here, just another acronym in education that we use a lot when technology really started to come about was the SAMR model, and really not just using technology for the sake of using technology and substituting it for something that I could have done paper pencil, but really moving across that spectrum to that redefinition and that transformation, things that our students would not have been able to do without the technology. You see just some examples there of, whether they're networking or they're storytelling or they're actually publishing their work beyond their particular classroom. And so we've been trying to work with our teachers across the past many years to move across that spectrum. You can see here the ISTE standards are from the International Society of Technology and Education, and you can see back in 1998 it was about let's learn how to use the tech, then it went to using it to learn, and now it's transforming that learning with technology, and that's even 6 years old. And those 7 standards down the right are the standards from ISTE that we work towards, and these are included in many of our curriculum documents as well, and that we are trying to ensure that our students meet those standards. I want to take you a step back to pre-digital transformation. What did it look like here in Perkiomen Valley? We had shared carts of Chromebooks available in our schools. There was definitely competition for those and availability and needing to sign them out, and a lot of wear and tear on those devices as they are shared and moved throughout the buildings. We did have desktop devices. I know we're all used to our laptops or Chromebooks now, but if you can picture back the monitors and the towers, we did have those in the back of many of our classrooms. We had computer labs for specific courses like explorations at the elementary or digital literacy in the middle school or some of our business courses here in the high school. And we did have computer labs, again, with those, whether they were laptops or desktop computers, available for sign-out. Like the learning lab here behind us used to be available for sign-out, but again, there was limited availability. So a teacher really had to plan for that time when they wanted to use that and couldn't flexibly or respond to what was going on with their students. This piece here, I looked back in our notes just to get some history. We formed a digital transformation committee back in the 17-18 school year. It included various stakeholders, board members, administration, teachers, of course, and we talked really and set a goal of having student access to modern resources to support their engaging learning experiences. And this kind of waterfall chart here shows you what the plan was. And we started back in March of 2019 when we purchased devices in a pilot at the end of that school year for 9th grade. They all received a new Chromebook. And then in the fall of the 19-20 year, we opened the school year with August and September distributions to students in our 6th grade and in our incoming 9th grade. And then our 10th graders had almost a brand new device they just got in March, and we were able to take the remaining existing devices in district and reallocate them to our 7th, 8th, and 11th, 12th grade. So we were really one-to-one between 6th to 12th grade. And then as you all know, the pandemic hit, and we pulled every resource that we had. We had funds from the foundation, we had ESSER funds to purchase Chromebooks so that everybody in district, K to 12, had a device. Some were pre-existing, some were new at that time. And then as this rollout continued, you can see the plan then became to continue to maintain that with purchasing devices for kindergarten, 5th, and 9th grade, with the expectancy of a Chromebook to be 4 to 5 years. And so you can see we are in the 22-23 year, and we only have 3 grade levels that continue to have existing devices. And it will take us out to that 25-26 year until everybody is in that cycle of receiving devices at K, 5, and 9. So that was our plan moving forward. The next slide here gives you the projected enrollments in those 3 grades that we have targeted for our cycle, and you can see the enrollment numbers. We are recommending, Mr. Ganesh and I, the purchase of 1,000 Chromebooks for next school year based upon those projected enrollments and some devices that we have left in our remaining inventory. This recommendation typically would come a little bit later in the year, but we're bringing it forth to you because, as you know, during the pandemic, there were chip shortages, there were shipping delays, and we had a lot of times where we were waiting for devices to come to us, and we are still concerned about some of those delaying receipt of Chromebooks prior to the start of the next school year. So should the board approve the recommendation, we would like to order them here in April in order to ensure that we receive them prior to the start of the school year. It does require some shifting of funds because we typically fund 1 grade level from Ready to Learn, which those funds are not available till July 1st, and the other 2 years we fund through leases through the technology budget. So we would do some flip-flopping to use ESSER funds now, which are available now, and then put something else back in the Ready to Learn. On the next slide here, I just wanted to, I know there were some questions about K-2 and those primary students, our youngest learners, and the devices that they are using, and I wanted you to get a picture of what are they doing with these devices. So we have many instructional tools. The top 3 that you see there are the 3 that when I ask the principals, what are we using the most in our K-2 classrooms? These are programs that we have invested in financially that are programs for reinforcement for students, enrichment for students, reading eggs, math seeds, and extra math. And they're used heavily in centers or stations in our primary classrooms. We have core resources that we have purchased in the last 6 years that all have digital components to them, and our students are used to logging into those programs to be able to access content. And we still have consumables for students. They are still writing in workbooks, as we used to call them. They are still accessing text in their hands, but this gives them another venue in which to access content that can extend beyond what may be in print in front of them. 2 that come to mind are our most recent Into Reading and our Science Dimensions. Principals also mentioned that even our youngest learners, our kindergartners, have Google Classrooms. Every teacher has a Google Classroom set up, and that is where they share a lot of their information on here's what you're going to do in Station A today or in Station B today, and they can click on there and access what they should be working on when they're in each of those particular stations. They also mentioned that there are times when we have absent students or an illness for a couple of days where that student takes their Chromebook home with them and then they can access the work that has been done in class. So it does allow for that student to continue in some of that progress. They are also researching. I know it sounds, like that's typically a secondary thing, but we have our youngest learners are researching. Maybe it's animals and they're doing a project on that, or plants. They use their own device to do some of that research and take their Chromebook to the library with them so that they can continue that research. Our students do take their devices to both their library special and their explorations each cycle, and sometimes, depending upon what's going on in their other specials, they may also take it there. And I do just want to point out that when we went one-to-one, there are no longer labs in our elementary buildings. So the explorations class, which used to be a lab and have its own laptops, no longer does. So if we were to make some different decisions, we would need to factor in ensuring that we had a lab available for kindergartners, first or second grade to go to if they don't all have a Chromebook to take with them. On the next slide, it's really hard to see. I know it's tiny, but Mr. Ganesh was able to pull. We use ClassLink as a single sign-on, and so our youngest learners, again, are very used to logging into that and having access to all of the programs that we have. So this just shows you some of the, again, top uses, and it gives you an idea of how many launches, meaning how many times have somebody logged in. Now, this is K-5, all 4 elementary schools. Some of these are over 70,000. So I just wanted to show you our kids are utilizing the resources that have been purchased. And then on the far right, it gives you an idea of about how long are they in that app or that program once they've launched it. And some of our heavy hitters are around that 12 to 15-minute range, which fits with when we do stations in our classrooms. And I really want to end this conversation on Chromebooks with, it really is about balancing. It's about balancing instructional practices and our tools with the technology. So we still want hands-on experiences for our kids. We want them to be touching things. We want them to be thinking and collaborating with others. We want to have small group work. We want inquiry-based learning. Sometimes there's teacher-directed instruction, independent activities, projects. But there's also the use of technology, and it's all about balancing that and trying to find the right balance. And we know, coming off of the pandemic, yes, students were on a device for a very long amount of time during their school day as they were trying to access their teacher through their computer. But we're, again, just looking for that nice balance where we have the devices accessible to us, but it is certainly not our desire to have students on a device all day long. And that's not happening in our classrooms. When we informally talk to our teachers, we're talking, 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, sporadically broken up into small chunks where a student might be on their device. I know for the board members, we have a learning walk, I believe, tomorrow at South Elementary, and hopefully we'll get to see some of that in action. Any questions on Chromebooks before I go on to?
Refresh my memory, do the seniors get to keep their Chromebooks when they graduate?
No, they do not, no. Mr. Gannett, I think that they turn them in.
Chromebooks in.
Okay. It seems 1,000 seems like a lot if the seniors left to recirculate them. If every student had a Chromebook last year from K to 12.
Right. So the Chromebooks that the seniors are using are 4 years old. So they're almost at the end of life. So when we receive those senior Chromebooks back, that's what we use for loaners or spares. So they will be repurposed. And when it comes to end of life at 5 years, whatnot, those Chromebooks will be recycled. So that's the reason why, we buy new Chromebooks every 4 or 5 years.
So looking at what you had up there a couple of slides ago about what K through 2 might be using their Chromebooks for, I mean, kindergarten, I'm thinking about a kindergarten day, it's what, 2 hours and 40 minutes, something like that. And so there's reading aids, there's the math, then science, library, explorations. I guess I'm just trying to understand how much time are they utilizing and looking at their Chromebook, especially the K through 2 students, and then wanting to know if there's data out there that shows that Chromebook usage really, in the younger grades in particular, does that impact and increase academic achievement? So those are the questions that I have.
Those are good questions, Mrs. Mares. So we were able to, since Friday, kind of informally poll some of our teachers, and not in all of the buildings, but the principals, in getting back to me, indicated in the K-2 environment, maybe about 30 minutes, if you think of that kindergartner's day, that they are on that. They're certainly not on all of these apps every single day. The teacher picks and chooses what is most appropriate on that particular day for them to utilize. As far as research, there is research available. I can certainly provide some of that. I believe Project Red and some others that aren't just coming to mind right now that we looked at when we were embarking upon the digital transformation before the pandemic even hit. So certainly some of that is available that does show a correlation to that. And I think the key is really using the tool to enhance the learning environment. So it's not just drill and practice, but it is how are we actually creating, and how are we then sharing that beyond our individual classroom. But we can absolutely share some of that research.
So I guess my question or statement would be, if the students have the one-to-one initiative, that means they have access to technology both home and at school, correct? They can take their Chromebooks home and then be able to utilize some of these sites at home on their own, correct?
Yes, now our kindergartners, just because they're the first group that's getting them, and they're little, sometimes the Chromebook is big for them, they do not take it home unless there's a special circumstance that maybe they are. If there's a project, or if we think there's impending weather coming, we may send it home for that. All students do take it home over the summer. So yes, they can continue to access these programs. If mom or dad wants to have some summer learning, or to work on some things during that time, that is available to them in the summer.
But then in the sense of an equity lens, it ensures that every student has access to these programs for kids who may not have had technology support prior to the one-to-one.
Yes, I would agree with you. And that was a big piece, again, pre-pandemic, when we talked about a one-to-one. We did talk about a BYOD, and we talked about other options, and that really was something that the committee felt would provide equity in that, again, we all have the same device, we all have access to the same things, not somebody coming in with, a 10-year-old laptop and somebody else has, brand new Mac or iPad or so forth. Wanting everybody to have the same device also makes it, for the teachers, easier when they're instructing that they're giving the same instructions to all of their students on how to access something.
Could you give me an idea as to how much access they have to, especially younger kids or even the older kids, to downloading their own choices of things? In other words, can they get Minecraft on there, kind of thing? I mean, so how is that monitored? How is that?
So we certainly filter things, but I am going to turn to Mr. Ganesh for that answer.
Right. So by default, we block certain categories like gaming and proxies and whatnot. Ours is more of a allow list. So most of the apps are allowed unless until we block. There are certain apps that we already go and block. There are certain sites there are certain uncategorized sites that we block. But outside of that, anything that is deemed educational is automatically allowed. So they are able to download other educational resources that they can find and use them. And also we have a tool called Securely that kind of goes home with the device. Even when the device goes home, we're continuing to filter the content and make sure that the emails or any other website that they're visiting are still safe. So we continue to keep those Chromebooks safer And if and when we find any inappropriate content, the building principals or the parents are even alerted based on what's on the device.
Ganesh, can you, I know as a, having seen the elementary dashboard, if you could just explain that the students are not accessing the internet openly, they go to a landing page and then they have to choose where they're going from there.
Right. So as Mrs. Smith mentioned, we have our Launchpad, our single sign-on solution. That's where we push all our apps to. So for example, a K to 2, like, we buy resources, and those resources are automatically pushed to those Launchpad, meaning that when the student is logged into the Chromebook, all the apps that they need to access are right on the Launchpad.
It
So there's
kind
no-
of looks like your iPad screen or your
Right.
phone screen for them, but on a Chromebook.
So there's no need for them to go and find resources unless there's a resource that's not out there that they want to find. And if any such resource comes out, we will push that resource to that Launchpad. That Launchpad is a constant list of, that's a growing list of apps that we have and we push. And that's how we're able to generate that report that you saw, the number of clicks, how much time the kids are spending on each app, or what's average time. That's how we're able to gather that information. I should probably get there.
I have a question from that standpoint. So you mentioned that, for instance, a second grader can go home and do research. So do they have access to Google search? Yeah, I know that.
That is correct. So
Do they have access to Google search?
yeah, so they have access to Google search, but there's something called Google Safe Search, which is enabled by default on all devices. The same thing with YouTube. We have a restricted mode that's enabled by default on all devices. So we do have these controls in place to make sure that the content that is accessible on these Chromebooks are appropriate.
One comment, and it kind of goes back to what Ms. Mayers was saying a while ago about the usage in the K to 2 bracket. I can only speak for a small percentage of kids that I work with every day in that 1 and 2 grade level. Not so much the kindergartners, but they are working on it in school every day after school. So when they are with us, they are constantly working on some of those. And a couple of them, I recognize the names of the programs because they seem to love those programs.
The only other thing I'd like to point out is, and certainly it is your prerogative if we determine to make some changes in K to 2, I would point out though that, for example, our third grade teachers report that the students come to them knowing how to use the device already. So if we change some of our practices or when students receive them, we'll have to be prepared for what that impact will be to older grades, as well as ensuring that in some of those classroom spaces like the library or explorations that we have devices and that we would need to purchase them or have them available in those spaces for those grades if they aren't one-to-one.
I'm not quite sure about that. I think the kids started using them in stations before third grade. So it doesn't seem quite right to me. Anyway, I'm not for having K through 2 have be plugged in. I think it's horrific for social and emotional learning. I think it destroys their individuality and their personalities. And the less screen time, the better. And I think that that's pretty much the general rule that's being published out there. The less screen time that these kids have during the day, the better they do overall performance and in life.
Anything else on Chromebooks? Okay. So the second topic here is a secondary math resource. As you know, we did a review for a secondary reading screener, and you approved Star Reader. We have now finished the process for a math screener. It's very similar to Star Reading, but it is for the content of math. We spoke about this at the Education Committee, and they did review 6 different products, and 8 stakeholders were part of that, and they are recommending Renaissance's Star Math. Again, very similar in the reports and information that we can get. It is administered in 20 minutes or less, similar to the reading piece, which will be extremely helpful. So this is a screener that would help us to identify areas in which students may need enrichment or remediation and to be able to respond to that. On the next slide, we have the information in terms of the costs. It is a 5-year digital subscription. We did the same thing with Star Reading. The licenses, the number there represents the students in grades 6, 7, and 8, and any high school students in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or Geometry. We felt like students that were beyond those in terms of their courses, at that point probably don't need to be screened because they're self-selecting the courses and being successful. The cost here is $56,912, and we have those funds in the Ready to Learn grant in 22-23. And then, of course, there may be some professional development just to ensure that our math teachers are prepared and ready to administer. And we would do this in math classes. We would not need a separate schedule for that. And then just a bit of an implementation plan. It looks very similar to the STAR reading. We would have access to the platform for the rest of this year in a pilot type with the commitment of July 1, and we would be able to administer to some of our classes to at least get our feet wet and then begin training and start to do this 3 times per year next summer. And we're currently having conversations with our principals about what our assessment schedule will look like next year and what STAR reading and STAR math replaces for us. Moving on then to the ESSER funds. If you could just go back 1 second, Dr. Russell. I put this little picture here because I wanted to remind myself. Part of the ESSER requirements from the government is that we have our allocations that you have approved and our plan available on our website. And we've had it there for quite a while since we were required to do that. But I just wanted to point out to the group and to the public that may be listening that if they want to find out anything about our ESSER allocations, we do have a website. It can be accessed through the COVID page. It can be accessed through curriculum and off of the finance page. We've linked it in several spaces, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew that that was something that we did comply with, and it's been there for quite a while. So then the ESSER 3, I wanted to present to you, and we have this as an action item, a reallocation of some of the categories, as well as we did receive this typically happens with federal programs, you get an amount you think you're going to get, and then it gets adjusted slightly either higher or lower. Same thing happened with this. So you can see it went up, a little bit over $1,000. But with the, as I mentioned earlier, the purchase of Chromebooks and Ready to Learn not being available till July 1st, we did flip-flop the STAR resource. What we had allocated for that can be purchased in Ready to Learn because we don't need to commit to that till July 1st, and therefore that frees up the money. So you'll notice just a higher amount in the classroom resources category because that's where Chromebooks would fall versus curricular resources. So that is for board action this month if you support that. And then I also wanted to point out to you, as has been mentioned by a couple of you around the table, the mental health funds. Dr. Russell has been working with different smaller committees to really look at the funds that are available. So that allocation amount for $664,000, we have since gone through and looked at what did we budget and what did we actually expend. And there were savings in some areas and other areas that were a little bit higher. And we've also put in a couple of the new ideas that have been presented, such as restorative practices, the Path to Wellness that was presented this evening, and I believe there is an action item tonight for a mental health counselor service. So we've added those, and that still leaves $120,000 that hasn't been allocated to anything in particular, but there have been lots of conversations about what that might look like or what it could be used for. So I just wanted you to see the funds that are available there yet. And then the last piece is enrollment and staffing. So I did add this in. This is not typically here each month, but there were some questions about charter school enrollment. And I was able to go back to October 2019. That's when we started reporting on charter school enrollment in a common format. So the chart is probably pretty hard to read, but if you're interested in looking at the difference between elementary versus secondary students, and the rows that are in that orangish color, those are your brick and mortar charter schools versus everything else is a cyber charter. And the chart at the bottom really just shows you how has that changed over the last several years. And interestingly enough, when I ran the report this afternoon, that 25 kids that are in the red line are the brick and mortar has stayed consistent across this whole time. Now, maybe they're not exactly the same students, but I found it to be interesting that it was really consistent. And then the other, you can see we certainly had a spike go up there in October of 2020, which was during the pandemic, the beginning of that, and then it certainly did come back down a little bit. So it just gives you some further information on charter school, both brick and mortar and cyber. And then we get into our projected enrollments. So kindergarten registration continues. We have finished all of our main registration dates, but principals are adding additional dates in April, and they have some appointments already set up. These are our registration numbers as of April 3rd from each of the buildings. And on the next slide here, you see our elementary enrollment projections. And I do want to point out that this month is a kind of a pivotal point for us because we've been doing lots of projections, and we recently sat with our entire administrative team and cabinet and really looked at, now let's get down into it much more carefully. So we, instead of having kindergarten projections, we actually put the numbers of the actual registrations in. And then we talked about how many staff might we need, do we have room to grow or not? And so you'll see maybe some changes in the kindergarten there, as well as some changes in other areas. We always account for maybe an 11% of growth between kindergarten and first. We have been a little bit more conservative with that, looking at the past couple of years and what that growth has looked like. So these numbers are much more, each month we get a little bit closer to being firmer. So out of the whole elementary program, due to declining enrollments, on the far left there you see a -2. So that's 2 positions out of the elementary program that we can reallocate elsewhere into other positions in the district. Middle school is next. Similarly, we did, very similar looking at things, and you'll notice here we are still projecting a decrease of 2 positions in Middle School East and across the whole middle school program. And that bottom picture again shows that 8th grade. That is that kind of bubble class that is coming through, that we have some shared staff that share East and West to try to help us bring some of those class sizes a little bit smaller in the areas in which we have certified staff. And then lastly, you have the high school numbers. This has not changed significantly from the March report here. So to summarize it for you, we have these 5.5 positions that we've been talking about for months, I think since December or January. That list has not changed, and you did approve the creation of these positions. We met with all of our administrators, and on the next slide, we've kind of brought it down, and you're going to see this really reflected in Mr. Weaver's report. But you'll see the elementary and the middle school both declining enrollments. We have 4 positions that we can reallocate from there. And then those anticipated staffing requests are on the far right there. So you'll see the 5.5 positions in those top 4 lines. And then you'll see this plus 0.5 in Elementary Viking Academy. We've talked about this before. There was 1.5 positions that were tenured staff members that we were committed to assuming into our budget. We have had a resignation in the elementary program that we are able to have that one person out of Viking Academy slot into an elementary position. So there's still only a 0.5 position left from Viking Academy that we have to account for in our budget and assume into the budget. So that leaves an addition of 6 positions, 4 of which we can fill by reallocation. So it's really only an add to our budget of 2 positions, which will be a reflection in the finance piece because we were at 5 was included. So that should be some savings that we will see in the budget. And we've been talking a lot about reallocation and are narrowing down what some of those shifts might look like. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. So 4.02, the enrollment reports are attached. Any questions? 4.03 will be a recommended action to approve an agreement with Penn State University to provide weekly summer enrichment camps for elementary students during the weeks of July 11th, 18th, and 25th of 2022 at a cost of $18,000. Any questions? Okay, move that to consent. 4.04, the recommended action will be to approve an agreement with Renaissance to purchase Star Math as a math level screener for secondary students at a total cost of $56,912 for 5 years. Are there any questions? So we can move that to consent. 4.05, the recommended action will be to approve the following international trip, which is Peru in the year 2024, as reviewed and forwarded by building principals and district administration. Any questions?
Dr. Kohler?
I just had one question. It looks like in the paperwork that this is being offered to Spanish Club only. Is that correct? Or will it be open to students who are enrolled in Spanish?
it will be open to students enrolled in Spanish. They're actually looking at the date that they would travel and kind of back mapping to figure out which class of students that they can start advertising to.
So move that to consent. 4.06, the recommended action will be to approve an agreement with Warren County School District to provide virtual instruction through their online instructional program as presented, pending final review by district solicitor. Any questions? Move that to consent. 4.07 will be, the recommended action will be to approve adjustments to allocations for ESSER 3 funds as presented. Any questions? That to consent, please. That ends my section.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dorr, business?
Thank you. 5.01, financial update. Mr. Weaver, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's a good start. Okay, so we have a packed agenda which reflects an awful lot of information that we went through at the Finance Committee. So we need to bring the school board up to date on several things. We'll start out with the 22-23 general fund budget update. Go ahead, Dr. Russell. Thank you. So we have a couple of adjustments. Again, this is the interactive. This is not unusual for everybody here. We're used to this. We have 3 adjustments on the revenue side, all to provide tonight. EIT continues to grow. We continue to watch that. Real estate transfer tax growth based upon actuals, year-to-date information, and interest earnings adjustment. We are increasing by $100,000. And we will continue to watch the Fed and how that interacts with our availability to invest in investments that we're allowed to, because obviously as the Fed interest rates continue to go up, the ability for us to go out into our limited market for school districts, those interest rate returns do go up as well. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Hurd and I did see today, we are now looking at interest rates perhaps over 1%. We are still at a 0.3. So if it would go over 1%, that would mean we would show some additional interest earning revenues to consider as we move through our budget process for 22-23. There are several adjustments, as has been discussed by Mrs. Smith. First, we are removing $587,000, almost $588,000 in our Bucksmont for health insurance. We go out with a standard 6% industry at 6, and now we're getting information from the second look that it's a negative number. Working with Mr. Moran, it appears that that negative number may be sustainable at our third look. So for the second look, we're going down to a 0, and if we have a negative impact on that in our third and final look, we will show some additional reductions to our expenditures. We have an increase for energy, obviously driven by our fossil fuel costs that we continue to work with the MCIU procurement group. Unfortunately, that is another $200,000 increase. We did already increase by $200,000. So overall, it's about a 200% increase from what we budgeted for this particular year. That's not really a surprise. We are removing the true-up costs because those true-up costs and the flexibility that the board provides the administration as we go through the budgetary process. As Mrs. Smith just pointed out, the administration has been doing some heavy work behind the scenes. Very proud to bring that forward and recommend that we are removing the true-up costs because those are no longer needed, and those would be a reduction, salary and benefits. We are, one other thing, we removed the 3.0 positions, as Mrs. Smith said. That's a negative $264,000. That's salaries, benefits, and insurances as well. That we removed from those newer positions that we were introducing since we hit the equal sign. And one other last adjustment to show the very successful bank loan results that we received. We reviewed in the Finance Committee with Ms. Doyle. And so we are recommending to remove those savings to put us at a nice level debt service for 22-23 and for 23-24 to keep them the same. As we utilize those savings from the bond bank results. So we would offer that up. When you carry that forward, the shortfall is 4.1 million. We've already approved certain uses of 1.345. That brings us to a $2.7 million shortfall, which is driving a 3.66% tax increase as of tonight. Remember, last month we stood in front of you and we were at a 5.94% tax increase. So we continue to move forward and move down. I am very optimistic to continue to drive this down, and we talked about this in the Finance Committee. To be comfortable between a 1.5 would be where we'd ideally like to get to, or 1.75, okay? Just sharing that out there, that's our goal, to get to that 1.5. Any questions on the current budget status? Again, I'm optimistic because we have yet to show the revenues from the state governors, from the governor's budget for the state. That would be a positive impact. The third look for Bucksmont, of course, and there's one other item that I'm forgetting right now, but which is other fairly significantly, a significant reduction on the expenditure side, or use of unassigned fund balance. There you go. We'll talk about that. So we have those three major positive influences on our budget moving forward. As we move forward, continue to develop your status as a board member, where you feel comfortable. Obviously, we'd all like to go out with a 0. Having said that, we are working towards that goal, that maximum goal of a 1.5 or a 1.75, just recognizing the amount of influences that we have, variables that we've reviewed over the year as we look for using our budget process. That is a snapshot that tells you where we have to get to and what additional cuts in expenditures, uses of fund balances, or recognitions of revenues we have to show in order to get to where you feel comfortable on the left-hand side. Okay? So a 1.5 means we need to still massage a difference of about $1.6 million. Again, I'm confident that between the Bucksmont reduction that we will show, the unassigned fund balance, and the increases in revenues on the state, we're in good shape. As a reminder, preliminary budget is in May, final budget is in June, and we'll continue to update and hammer away at this process. I mentioned the bank loan results, and the reason it's bank loan is because we indicated that we were going through a unique approach, a dual approach, specific to our needs at Perkiomen Valley. The dual approach was a bank loan RFP and an internet auction, which we're all accustomed to the internet auctions. When we did this on March 25th, we set everything in place with the parameters resolution. We had a fantastic bank loan result from JP Morgan Chase, which produces $635,000, almost $636,000 worth of savings over the course of a 9-year bank loan. Dr. Russell, if you would advance. So essentially what that means is this is the spreadsheet, the cut sheet that was shared by Ms. Doyle. Essentially, she shows the savings in those first 2 years. An important point to share is that we have no savings for this particular year. Sometimes when we do bond refundings or bank loan in this particular case, we actually have savings in this particular year because we have budgeted $10 million and the bank refunding shows immediate results in this current year. We don't have that in this particular time. So there is nothing for the school board to debate about actual savings and where to put those monies, whether it's back into the unassigned fund balance, PSERS commitment, capital projects, or any of that stuff. We don't necessarily have that conversation. We do have the ability to utilize savings into the future, and we can build those in. That's our recommendation to move forward. It does not need school board approval because it's still budgetary. If you have questions or concerns about that, we can add or we can adjust moving forward. Again, our plan is to match our future debt service for 22-23 and 23-24 to the same number. That inflates that number for 22-23 because the actual debt service is a little bit less than that, driven by the bank loan refunding savings. And what we'll do is at the end of business, June 30, 2023, we'll take the difference between what we budgeted and what the actual payment was, and then we'll have a discussion about where the school board would like to put that, whether that's back into PSERS committed, back into capital projects. Right now, we would recommend capital projects because we do know we're tracking an awful lot of capital project values, And that's how we're going to produce those savings over the next couple of years. Any questions on that? Again, fantastic bank loan results. No need for us to go through with an internet auction. Jamie Doyle did go through that and showed that the total interest coupon rate that we showed, 2.2% on the overall bank loan, cannot be touched in the current environment because of the market volatility. So if we go out on the wrong day, we're not going to get those savings. So stick to the bank loan. And again, the parameters resolution allows us to move forward with that without any further board action. So I mentioned that we talked about an awful lot of things in our committees, and I'm very happy to see that the school board reported out on some of those tasks. This is just a simple process for me. I thought it was a unique way for us to show with a heavy burden on our committees this month to show what it is that we talked about and where we talked about them specific to the business agenda before you tonight. So the 22-23 North Montco budget, as was mentioned by Mrs. Mayers, that was discussed in the Finance Committee as a note. The resolution to end the tax payment and penalty provisions, we've been tracking that in the Finance Committee about changing our partial payments and going back to the way we used to do business pre-pandemic. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to point out that we have been tracking an awful lot of these for many months at this point in time, and we're happy to bring these forward. But if you have any questions or concerns in something that is not addressed tonight, please bring them forward, and you can look at those notes at each one of these committees to help substantiate some of that background information if you so need it. That's all that was intended for. So the next item are new sports. One of the things that we did talk about for several months in regards to the Finance Committee, we did have a presentation in regards to a new bowling team that was proposed by Mr. Felty. We did review this at the March 3rd and the March 31st meeting, both this one and the next, the competitive cheer. To set this up, it would be $15,066. This would be an add to the budget, and Mr. Moran would not like it if I did not say that we also have to go forward with and talk to our union about those estimated credits and the values of those credits as well. So this is the estimate of $15,066 to bring bowling as a PIAA-sponsored PVSD sport, as was discussed, and we would recommend that. In a similar fashion, we also talked about competitive cheer team, as was presented again by Mr. Felty, and the total cost for those, for that particular team to come on board, complete with uniforms, and again, the stipends to be talked about with co-curricular units, $6,600. There was some discussion at the Finance Committee, I will follow up, in regards to the uniforms. But our recommendation would be to go forward with the uniforms in there and have Mr. Felty work the 5-year or the uniforms into the 5-year replacement cycle. Any questions about those? If not, oh yes, Dr. Campley.
It's just a general question that maybe we could talk about at some point. I am concerned, I feel like there's a disparity in that the uniforms for cheer and other sports, bowling, are covered as part of the budget. But when you look at marching band, for example, those students are expected to pay for their own uniforms. And that's on top, so that's like a $100 fee for the uniform, plus the $100 fee for the year, the activity fee for the year, plus $40 for shoes. I just think we need to consider, I know there was also comments made about those who were in the musical having to pay for their own costumes. So I think that's something we need to have a conversation about, the equity of how we're budgeting when there's additional costs, like such as uniforms, moving forward.
Thank you, Dr. Campley. I do know that we have been talking about that at our ad hoc student activities fees committee as well. So. Okay, another item that was discussed at our Finance Committee was the high school auditorium upgrades. Now, for those of you who have been here for a while, you do know that we've been talking about our high school auditorium for quite some time. Specifically, the new seating almost a year ago, we've started looking at different seats, different ways to look at that. New carpeting, Mr. Fabrizio has been working with. New lighting, Mr. Ganesh has been a long-term project over the past couple of years looking at the lighting. And the stage refurbishment, Mr. Fabrizio worked on that as well. I'm offering it up for discussion tonight. It is a project that we do need to address in some way, shape, or form in the near future. So I'll open it up for discussion. There was no recommendation. We just recognize that it is a big ticket item and something that we need to address sooner or later because there are uses for that particular auditorium that Dr. Moss has long been wanting to utilize it for, but simply cannot because it's not up to par. Dr. Kolar.
Just a question on if we were to move forward with these 4 items, what the timeline would be? Is this something that could be done over a summer so it's not impacting the use during the school year?
Sure, that's a great question because the process would be, depending upon how the discussion would go tonight, we would go out and then we would actively go forward with the bidding process or co-stars. We have estimates. Clearly, we do have estimates, but we'd have to go through the bid procurement process in some way, shape, or form and bring those back and independently have the school board agree to those contracts. That would delay it another month. But yes, we do know that for seeding purposes, they are saying they're 10 to 12 weeks out. So that would really be pushing, for instance, the summer installation. Because if we approve it in May, those 10 to 12 weeks, depending upon delivery and all that kind of stuff, would really, really tighten that timeline. That's just for seats. Lighting, of course, supply chain issues a little bit different for lighting. And those parts are coming from different areas. The carpeting and the stage refurbishment could probably be done in the summertime. So bits and pieces of it could be done in the summer, but the bulk item of the seating would definitely need to be, that would be a timeline pusher. And the lighting, I don't think would be available until the fall under current environment. Ms. White.
For the proposal for the seating, what is gained by what was quoted? Are we gaining space, or, I mean, we're sort of confined to the space that the room is, and so I think that in it of itself, aside from the need for renovation and upgrade, is sort of what the problem with the space is. The space itself is not adequate. So I know that there were conversations about obviously a larger scale renovation to allow for a more appropriate high school auditorium experience. And this seems like it's instead of that. So I'm curious about that and whether or not this new seating would then transform that room. I know there was a separate lane conversation about creating more of a lecture hall, which is really, that's a more appropriate, that's what that room is to me, like a college lecture hall sort of environment. Is that what this 230 to 300, depending on style? If that's the case, do they have tablet arms? Is there power in the seats? I'd just like to understand a little bit more based on the conversations that you've had with the high school administrators and the vision for that room. That still doesn't solve the high school auditorium problem. This just creates a separate new space for learning. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's a great comment. Absolutely. The chairs would be, regardless of the style, in the initial measuring of everything, it would be a seat-for-seat replacement. And the tablet arms were something that Dr. Moss was pretty much insistent upon because of study halls in there. And the fact that we're at a one-to-one, especially here in the high school, and, you know, the students, when we were there, we were looking, students were on their laps trying to type or trying to put it up on the seat in front of them trying to type, which, you know, that's how Weavers do it. That's why it's a little wonky. But the tablet arms would add a little bit to that. And of course, there's various styles of the tablet arms. How big is the tablet? Is it 10 inches? Is it 14 inches? And the different types of materials that would go into that. That's why there's a disparity there in cost.
No, I understand that that would be the reason. So I guess the question is, with regard to the ask, is this just really open for conversation, or is there a recommendation for the type of seating that Dr. Moss is really looking for? I mean, in my mind, if we're going to do it, it should have the tablet arms and obviously some sort of a power in each, accessible in each row. You know, obviously, I think that that's kind of a no-brainer these days. You know, everybody needs to plug in somewhere. And then my other question was with regards to the materials that are proposed here with costs, is that reflected in any way to the MCIU consortium that we're going to be approving, or that's on the agenda tonight?
So I believe the MCIU bid is specifically for classroom furniture. We could look into that. As far as the electric goes, we did talk about how it is packed, and it's a concrete floor, so we would have to literally drill holes and channels, I think conduits, into the concrete and down and put them below level, so that people don't step on them or trip on them as tripping hazards moving forward.
Right. So, and again, this is very specific to the particular type of seating. It actually can be manufactured to be integral to the actual seat itself, and the conduit could run and trench underneath the seats.
Yes.
So it wouldn't have anything to do with any walkways or pathways. But again, there's a cost associated with that. But I'm curious as whether or not these numbers are reflected in any of the buying consortiums, and whether or not a vendor specifically came in to speak to whether or not that application, the 10 to 12 weeks sounds really light, to be honest with you. I think that in higher education, open areas, I would say between 16 and 20 weeks is probably more realistic in a custom outfit of that type of furniture, depending on the style.
We did have individual vendors come in, and the individual vendors met with myself, Dr. Moss, Mr. Fabrizio, to go through those different types. But there was nothing other than the tablet arm that was really specific that we knew we really wanted to go with. Dr. Campley.
So I guess I was misunderstanding. I thought the idea of doing this high school auditorium upgrade, part of it was to have a space that the high schoolers could utilize and call their own for drama purposes. Is that not the case, and this is going to be more of an academic lecture hall usage?
I would say that it would be more of the design that it is now. I think the problem with the current design is that it's kind of landlocked, right? There's not much in the way of storage. There's not much in the way of the ability to maneuver on the stage. And I am not a drama person, but I'm pretty sure that that stage itself is smaller. So I think the bigger the stage, the easier it is to have an actual production, which I don't think that that high school stage can do as well as middle school east. Dr. Russell.
So I would just also add the high school has performed its fall play back in the high school auditorium in recent years. I think the purpose would be twofold, and it would be the two that you described, Dr. Campley. The idea was to upgrade the space for our students that are in there every day. The chairs are really uncomfortable, and they're very old. They're the original chairs, and also support with that desk that's conducive to them working when they're in there, but also to serve as a venue for performances when they're appropriate in that smaller space. East is very large. It's 1,000. West is nice. It's 550 or so, a little more intimate. The high school is just a little bit smaller than that. So there may be times when it would really be appropriate. So the idea would be the lighting does help with performances. The upgrades to the lighting are proposed to support performances when they occur. The new carpeting, of course, is an upgrade, refurbishing the stage, but the seating is also something that we have felt really driven to recommend be upgraded too, so that it could actually serve both of those purposes as described.
And to your point, Dr. Campley, who knows if we do it right, what might change in there? I mean, you could have individual duos or percussion, something along those lines in a smaller venue.
I mean, I agree. I think it's just very important that at some point we think about getting a space for the drama department to be able to have their shows so that they don't have to rely on, I mean, they really should be able to do their musical in the high school. They shouldn't have to rely on practice schedules around when the middle school availability is, when the middle school's musical is, because they can't get in there because their stuff is still there from their musical that they did. I just think it's something that, some of these kids want to go to college to become, to go into the arts and to do drama and to do music, and we really need to provide a space so that they can have those opportunities available to them and not have to worry about whether or not the middle school is open.
I have a question. So, do we know the size of the stage at the high school? No. It's considerably smaller than the size of the stage at East. So the only way you would have to have a different stage, not refurbish the stage, a larger stage, which is then potentially makes the room even, you probably have to take out rows to make the room even smaller. So when we're talking about potentially making the high school auditorium more equitable for the arts, we're talking about a larger stage. Like that's the end result. The stage has to get larger because, from what I understand, it's not large enough to put on a show like the Spelling Bee. It would just not large enough.
Actually, I disagree with that. It's not necessarily the size of the stage. I mean, they've done high school musicals. I was in them with casts that were double the size of Putnam County Spelling Bee, and they were just fine, and they were wonderful performances. So I think it's a matter of how they utilize the space and that they have the technology to do things that they need to in the space, more so than maybe the size of the stage. I think if a stage was bigger, it would be great. The director would love it, but it wouldn't preclude them from being able to do things with that space. And I'm sure if we had Mr. Mallets to speak to that, there's things that they can do on a stage that size. And I've gone to professional performances on smaller stages than the high school stage.
Just for context, this is a conversation with regards to this auditorium space that we've been having for at least several years running, that we've actively been talking about it. And so the bottom line is it's the fact that the architecture of that area does not suit the need of an auditorium. So it's stage size, it's audience size, it's both. So the conversation dialing back was how to make the space that exists, short of doing a full-blown demolition and, rebuild of that particular wing of the building, how do we make that space work with the best intention in collaboration with Dr. Moss and high school administration in the current walls that it exists in. As far as an annex, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see within the walls of the high school building proper a way to create a stage experience that's even close to the same size as the one at East. It would have to be an annex, some sort of an addition to the building itself, similar to the way that the gym was created. So I think that although that it is recognized that the high school does deserve that, and the music and arts department does deserve that, I think that within the walls of what exists, the high school also deserves to have a conversation to how to make this room the most usable and user-friendly for a student experience educationally.
Okay, so we can continue the conversation? Okay, and in future meetings, and continue to hash out what it is.
So, Mr. Weaver, what would be the next step? Because I think there is support to make changes to the auditorium. I think the majority of us at the Finance Committee said that we need to move forward with this. So I think we need to move forward with what the next step would be, if that's bringing people in to actually do price quotes or whatever. But I don't want to belabor this conversation and make it so that we can't do things this summer. So whatever has to happen next, if we need to have some sort of motion on. Is it on for today?
It is.
So whatever we need to do to move on to the next step, let's do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the direction. And, okay. All right, so moving on, tennis court resurfacing. We have been talking about the tennis courts and the tennis court resurfacing for a little bit of time now. We do know that we've worked them into our capital project presentation and our master facility plan going back to AEM back in 2018 as far as an ideal time for us to go forward with actually resurfacing those tennis courts. There has been conversation since 2005, 2006 when we put them in that a typical life for resurfacing is 8 to 10 years. Obviously, we are well beyond that point in time. There are cracks in the surface of the tennis courts. I do know that just as soon as today, Mr. Fabrizio was out there confirming that there are cracks near some of the nets. Some of the poles aren't exactly upright. So this might be a longer-term view for us than just simple resurfacing. So we were going to offer up resurfacing the tennis courts in 2023. You may remember it was on our listing of capital projects that we considered in December, and we decided to hold off on that until a future year or two. So now the conversation came back around. We re-engaged in that conversation, associated slightly with the pickleball conversation that started that up. We talked about this in the Finance Committee. We brought it forward. We do have an active quote that we were willing to move forward with. And now, having heard a little bit of the consternation, we do know that we have already summer plans for community education. And we're struggling. Mr. Felty confirmed that we're struggling to find alternative placement for those programs. The question before the board is, should we hold off on the resurfacing until 2023 and perhaps get a larger quote? And to also move forward with an internal process that was shared with the school board via email in regards to gates to be repaired. We do have a quote for those. It's less than $4,000 to repair those gates. So that would be an operations kind of a budget thing, not a capital project thing. Obviously, if we talk about resurfacing or redoing those tennis courts, that would be a much larger price tag and capital project labeled. It was recommended to be moved forward from the Finance Committee into the conversation piece at that point in time. Dr. Russell.
Just want to add, I've spoken with Mr. Felty about this since there have been some questions brought forward. And he did mention that the company that they are working with most closely right now can do 4 courts in a week, so that there would always be 8 courts available. They can't do this resurfacing when the temperature drops below 50. So summer is an ideal time to do this. That would be outside of a fall season and spring season for tennis. However, they did indicate that there would be 8 of the 12 courts always available. That's how they would rotate them. So that was something I just wanted to make sure the board was aware of. He also suggested the consideration for the pickleball courts up at West. I know that was briefly discussed as part of safety and operations, but those courts aren't used as much and may serve that purpose a little bit more practically, since these courts are used quite a bit. So something for the board to also consider.
I have a question in regards to that. There was a study done prior to the turf field done by a company, an engineering company, ELA. Did that study go over the entire complex? For instance, did it go over the tennis courts? Did it go over the tracks? Or is that solely focused on the football program or the football field?
It was a complete athletic facilities review.
So does the tennis courts fit to that realm? So for instance, the track at West is in deplorable shape. The baseball fields at West, they couldn't play games today because the fields weren't prepared. Does the allocation of the money for the tennis courts fit with the engineering study that the school paid to have done?
As far as a timeline goes, or?
No, in terms of, so a survey was done and it put a list together of the conditions of all the complexes.
Yes.
Athletic activities. So
Yes.
tracks, fields, fencing, football fields, baseball fields, softball fields, tennis courts, etc. Is the tennis court need above some of the other things that the money could be more allocated for? So, for instance, I found it interesting that the RFP stated that the courts were in really good condition, but we have tracks that are in poor condition. We have other things in poor condition. Wasn't the purpose of the survey to actually put in a process of where the money should, like, here are all the things, these are the levels of which things need to be replaced. Why are we jumping the gun on something that is in good condition when we have other aspects of our campus that are in poor condition?
That's a fair question. And what we can do is we can look at that, what the report stated, and I can be better prepared, provide that information to the board. I don't have that information right now. But yes, that was the purpose of the master facility and the athletic master facility plan.
Yes, sir, that's what I couldn't
Yes.
get the wording.
Ms. Wood?
I think prioritization is what really the question is, but with regards to that, the conversation that we've had up to this point about the tennis courts is that they have never been touched. They have never been resurfaced since they were installed,
That is correct.
and that they should be. I realize there's more than one facility that needs addressing, but the problem is that there was obviously a huge bundle of everything that wasn't addressed for a long time. So unfortunately, there's a pain point in getting everything back up to speed, correct, Jim?
Yes.
So on the heels of that, I would, and their installation and their initial installation, is it possible to hear a little bit more feedback from the initial conversation, comment about why the pickleball courts are not favorable? I just would like to understand. I know that there were stakeholders involved in the discussion, and after that initial discussion, we did receive several email feedback about the appropriateness of that. I know that Mrs. Mayers has mentioned it as well with regards to certain play and things like that, and I don't understand enough about it to make a decision about whether or not it should be.
I know the PAC, because we talked about this in one of the meetings, so PIAA or PAC, whatever it is for tennis, they have stated that if we put pickleball lines on the courts, we can still have our tournaments there.
No, I understand that part, but it seemed like there was specific feedback from someone that had firsthand knowledge about our courts.
So, I mean, the feedback that I would offer comes really from Mr. Felty and a few in the public, which is that when the lines are painted on the courts, it is a confusing picture for students. And when they play, they call their own balls. So it can be confusing. He had an aerial photo that he shared with Mr. Weaver and I that I can in turn share with the board. There is also a question about whether or not those lines are a safety issue. He does not have a lot of information about that, but it has been brought forward to him that they could be. I am very much in favor of supporting our community with pickleball courts. Mr. Pongras, who is a coach this season of tennis, recommended maybe the lower 4 get those lines. However, there's a lot of girls that go out for tennis where they use all 12 courts, which prompted the consideration to go back up to West and think about maybe pickleball courts there. But we can invite Mr. Felty to be here and speak more directly to that if it would be helpful. But that was one aspect of the pickleball lines. It creates a confusing matrix of lines on the court.
That was a topic of conversation, as you pointed out, Ms. White, at several different committee meetings since we've been talking about that.
I would appreciate hearing more information and maybe seeing a visual of Middle School West, because I don't understand or know where we're talking about possibly putting the pickleball courts. So I think more information on that would be helpful in making our decision.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question because if I remember correctly from that study that was done, the West courts were in pretty bad shape. And we had even talked about, I believe, just kind of removing them completely and turning it into parking or something else because they weren't usable. So if that's true, I'm not sure if I'm remembering it all correctly, then what would it take to bring those up to speed to have a pickleball court there?
I think what I'll do is pull the facilities study, both of them, actually share them with the board this week, and we can speak to that a little bit. We can call out some of these highlights and these salient points that might be helpful moving forward in the conversation. We can do that.
Can you also include what Mr. Felty's safety concerns would be with the lines? That I'm not sure what his safety concerns would be.
Yeah, I don't know that he has them as much as some others who have engaged in the conversation, but I'll find out more information, and I'll share that with the board as well.
Okay, so we've got some work to do. That's why we brought this forward for a discussion. So I appreciate the information and the feedback. Our last item is the walkability bike study. We have been tracking this for quite some time, again, in various committees. And what we're recommending is to hire Montgomery County Planning Commission at a cost of $11,519.25 to provide a base study associated with walking and bikeability of our school buildings. We did something similar at Schwenksville several years ago. That dollar figure was covered by a grant through the county. At this time, we don't have a grant that is available to help offset this, nor does the county have one available for us to use that we're aware of. And in working with the Montgomery County Planning Commission people, this is their quote. The other quote that we were working with was Gilmore and Associates, and they were somewhere north of $18,000 for a similar bike and walkability study. And we are recommending doing this. This helps us get our base criteria down. It's also a good risk management item for us to have on hand from an independent party, third party, to help us review possible safe bike routes or safe walkability routes for our children throughout the district.
I had a question. I was surprised to see South Elementary on the list, given that it's right on 113 and there's no type of sidewalk or anything.
Yeah,
why that would be included on this list?
Yeah, that's not, we told them up front that would not be there. In a similar fashion to West as well.
I'm curious, what was the feasibility study that came back for Schwenksville? What was the result of that?
So the result of that, if I recall correctly, recommended some additional spaces for students that could walk. It was not a bike study. And based upon that, there were some additional offshoots associated with health and wellness and getting children to walk more often than taking the bus. At the end of the day, it did not expand the walker area for Schwenksville because there were too many safety issues associated with high traffic roads.
So we did a survey and then made no changes.
That's correct. At the end of the day. Other than the programming for safe and health.
And Dr. Kohler's right. There's no way South could have a bike. And could West? I mean,
No.
No.
Nope.
So, again, we could be spending $11,000 to be told nothing.
And then you just said that when you did for Schwenksville, that was just a walk study, not a bike study.
That is correct.
So is there any reason why we're not including at least the bike portion on this? Like, has there been any interest? I just don't want to leave a group out if there's been interest expressed by families that they would like their children to bike. I don't know how it would be safe, but I would be open to hearing what a study had to say.
Yeah, sure.
Well, this one doesn't list Schwenksville.
Oh, I'm sorry, the school there. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'd like to also share the Schwenksville study with the board, and we can review that and pull out some of those highlights and what we took away. So yes, good question.
See, the last sentence there underneath paragraph A, it says Schwenksville Elementary School has a previous study done, but will have its results updated for inclusion in this report.
Yeah, so Schwenksville's they're all
Yes.
included, but, yeah.
Ms. White.
Just realistically, though, so this includes, when the report comes back, it's going to have, obviously, the findings of the feasibility of the safety, correct? Will there be an inclusion of signage recommendations, things that would make it safe as well? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't believe it will. However, it will recommend perhaps another crossing guard at some place.
I guess my question is, we're paying for costs, so what are the deliverables with regards to that cost? Because to me, this number, although it's fine to do it district-wide, I think that there is some value to having a documentation for every building, regardless of whether or not it's actually feasible. This really focuses on the campus proper. I think that to me is what the value of the study really is for, because the conversations that have happened with regards to being able to bike to and from main campus is really, and that's 3 buildings. So I guess I'm just curious what the deliverables are for that. Is that just a time, like a cost for the time of doing the study, or are we getting something back in return?
Well, other than a full report that explains that, that would be it.
Thank you very much.
All right, I think that's it, Dr. Russell, maybe? Okay, there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. 5.02, grants and donations. We have one grant from Giant for $13,318 for nutritious meals. It was given to the entire district. 5.03 is a motion to approve a settlement agreement and release in lieu of FAPE as recommended by the solicitor. Any questions? Okay, please move to consent. 5.04, motion to approve a settlement agreement and release of FAPE in lieu of FAPE as recommended by the solicitor. Any questions? We can move that to consent, please. 5.05, motion to approve the 2022-2023 North Monco Technical Career Center budget. Any questions? Seeing none, please move to consent. 5.06, motion to approve an agreement with the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit to provide a licensed mental health counselor 2 days per week at a rate of $80 per hour, effective April 12th, 2022 through June 15th, 2022. Any questions?
Yes. Do we know how many individuals this person's going to be able to handle, and do we know how many people might be interested in doing this?
We have a meeting with our high school team this week to actually talk more about that, and they're going to be recommending some of the more serious cases where they would benefit from this individual. I will share that the survey that was sent out last week in the weekly message generated interest at the level of about 66 families who are interested in teletherapy services were the district to opt to offer them. So there does appear to be some interest, but at the high school, it would be driven by current counselors, their loads, and who they believe would be best suited, how many individuals the person can serve or meet with. That person is scheduled to be here 8 hours, so similar to a teacher's schedule, so not certain how many individuals they will actually end up seeing, all total, during the course of the day. We can certainly nail that down and share that with the board.
So is the 66 people who, was that just high school, or was that total?
Total district-wide, that was just that very brief survey to get a pulse on where is the community and their thinking about the benefit of teletherapy services. These would be something offered really in the home, not in school. So that was the idea, and we wanted to get a sense of who would be interested and participate in these if they were made available.
And have they stated how long a session would last?
Yeah, sessions are 30 minutes to an hour.
So for those 66 people, it would be about 2 sessions, because we're capping it at 12,000.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. The 66 are outside in the community, not necessarily high school.
Got
and
it.
they're ones that I was inquiring about teletherapy. For the high school, this individual, we're testing the waters here. This individual will come in, be on site for 2 days, and be able to see probably up to 6 students maybe a day. I would defer to some of our counseling specialists over here. Maybe 6 or 7 people a day if they're here 8 hours, and the high school counselors would recommend who may be the ones that this individual would see and work with. 2 days a week, high school. High school has the highest, the greatest need right now, based on what we're learning, and we believe will maximize the resource most effectively.
If I might add to that, my guess is that this would be something along the lines more of a crisis counselor. So it would not necessarily be somebody who's on the schedule to be seen weekly. They may be seen once, they may be seen twice. Each of the counselors is looking at caseloads roughly at 300. So when they have a caseload at 300, there are always those that are going to be more critical that they oftentimes don't have the opportunity to see. This would help to offset that critical need.
Are we okay moving that to consent?
That's
I'd
what
like to
they're
leave it
offering.
off consent so we could talk about it more.
I was going to say, it sounds like you're having a meeting, so you can give us more information.
Yeah, Dr. Boyd's the lead on this. She's meeting with the team this week, and we can bring you some more details, hopefully even by Thursday in the memo, and fine tune some of the conversation so far.
Okay, so we'll leave it off consent for now. 5.07, motion to accept a resolution formalizing the end of the prior year's modified tax payment and penalty provisions and modifying the schedule for the installment payment of taxes as presented. Any questions? All right, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.08, it's a motion to approve the stipulation to settle for a tax assessment appeal for parcel ID 04-00-01642-00-1 as presented in the attached resolution. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.09, it's a motion to approve the purchase of 1,000 Lenovo Model 500E Chromebooks for the one-to-one initiative at approximate cost of $409,750 through CoStars and PEP-PM. Any questions?
We can leave this off consent.
That's what I was
You want to leave it off consent? Okay, take it off, leave it off consent. 5.10, motion to approve, motion approval to participate in the MCIU classroom learning spaces furniture as presented. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.11 is motion to approve PSX Inc. to provide swipe card access across the district buildings at a cost not to exceed $265,000 as recommended by the Finance Committee. Any questions? Seeing none, please move to consent. 5.12, it's a motion to approve a Great Valley Lock Shop to install new cores in 184 doors across the district at a cost not to exceed $14,000 as recommended by the Finance Committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.13 is the tennis courts. We just leave that off consent for now. 5.14 is a motion to approve upgrades to the high school auditorium to include new seating, new flooring, new lighting, and refurbished stage. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, please move to consent. 5.15, motion to approve Montgomery County
I
Planning
apologize,
Commission.
Mr. Dirk, can we stop? Do you want to leave? I know, because we had a lot of questions.
No, I think the work needs to be done.
You're okay with as it is?
Well, we're not committing to any vendors, we're just approving the costs.
Yeah, they'll come back next month with
Right.
Yeah.
contracts.
They do still have work to do, but we need to
Yeah.
approve the cost.
5.15, motion to approve the Montgomery County Planning Commission to conduct a walkability bike study for district buildings at a cost not to exceed $12,000. Any questions? I mean, should we leave this off consent until we've read the study, all right,
I think it'd be helpful if we could see the previous study.
Yeah,
before-
I'm
yeah.
fine leaving this off consent as well. 5.16, it's a motion to approve Raptor to provide Raptor security systems at all district school buildings to include the system, software, and computer equipment at a total cost not to exceed $26,612 via CoStars as recommended by the Finance Committee. Any questions? Seeing none, please move to consent. 5.17, it's It's a motion to approve Land Mobile, Inc. to provide new radio system at a cost not to exceed $98,088 via CoStar's contract number 012-195 as recommended by the Finance Committee. Any questions? All right, please move to consent. 5.18, motion to approve Z&H Technologies to install a new projector in the middle school West Library at a cost of $7,374 as recommended by the Safety and Operations Committee, as recommended by the Finance Committee. Any questions? All right, please move to consent. 5.19, it's a motion to approve the Freedom Valley YMCA and North Penn YMCA rental agreements that represent a 3.4% increase for the 2022-2023 school year as recommended by Finance Committee. Any questions? All right, seeing none, please put on consent, and that ends my section.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Dr. Campley.
Section 6 is payment of bills, and we will be discussing 6.01 and 6.02 on April 11th. That ends my section.
Thank you, Dr. Campley. Mr. Keenan.
I think you mentioned right at the beginning, but 7.01 through 7.08 are on consent, and 7.09 is just holding the place for approval of extended school ESY professional appointments, which we will vote on, I guess, next week. That's it.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kolar.
Section 8, support personnel, items 8.01, 2, 3, and 4 are on consent, and 8.05 is a placeholder for the approval of the 2021 ESY support appointments, and that concludes Section 8.
Thank you, Dr. Kolar. Ms. Evans-Brockett.
Section 9, governance. 9.01 is a first reading on policies, and you can see the policies listed. 9.02, the recommended action is to hold a second reading and adopt the following policies: 608, 609, 615, 616, 17, 18, 16, 6.1, 710, 812, and 813. Are there any questions? Can move that to consent. 9.03, the recommended action is to approve an exception policy 202, eligibility of non-resident students, to allow a student to continue attending South Elementary from April 30th, 2022 through the end of the 2021-2022 school year as a non-resident student beyond the 20 days prior to the last day of school as indicated in policy. Any questions? Seeing none, can move that to consent. 9.04, the recommended action is to approve an exception to policy 202 to allow a student to continue attending South Elementary from May 9th, 2022 through the end of the 2021-2022 school year as a non-resident student beyond the 20 days prior to the last day of school as indicated in policy. Any questions? Can move that to consent. Item 9.05, the recommended action is to approve a yet named board member to be Perkiomen Valley School District representative to the MCIU Board of Directors for the 2-year term from July 1, 2022 through June 30, 2024.
Yeah, that has to be updated. That was supposed to be Rowan Keenan. It didn't make it into the final agenda, his name. So can we amend that? Make an amendment to add the motion read to approve Rowan Keenan to the Perkiomen Valley.
Well, it wasn't a motion, so.
Yeah.
So the recommended action next week will to be approve Mr. Keenan. Are there any questions? Can move that to consent. 9.06, the recommended action will be to adopt the attached resolution declaring May 2022 as Student Loan Month. Any questions? Can move that to consent, and that ends section 9.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Evans-Brockett. Anyone from the audience like to make a comment? Seeing, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Jason, not going to get away that easy. Good evening. The reason I'm rising tonight is, sorry, can't hear me well? My name, Robert Leggett. Yeah, I know, you guys know who I am. Robert Leggett, Perkiomen Township. Sorry, it's I feel so comfortable sometimes here. The reason I rose tonight is about the Chromebooks. The one-to-one initiative is one of the finest things that this district has done in the past. The one-to-one initiative is what allowed us to go into the pandemic reasonably prepared compared to other districts. The fact that we had as many Chromebooks available for our student body at that time was something that was quite frankly remarkable, that we were able to pull from our reserves and give every one of our students the chance to have the hardware that they needed to learn during this pandemic. Now, I'm not anticipating another pandemic coming, but I do believe that the one-on-one initiative is important and is something that, even though we moved it off of consent tonight, still needs to be seriously looked at. The hardware that we use to get us through this pandemic, face it, is breaking down. A lot of it is old. It is time for us to replace the hardware that we have here and give the students that we have now the same opportunities and the same hardware that allowed the success of the students that we have currently. It's an important project, and it is one where we need to step up and continue what we have done so well in this district. The fact that students don't necessarily use the laptops, especially at the lower levels, kindergarten, first and second, for a majority of their work, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have that tool available for them. I'm very proud of the fact that our district, when we needed to step up, had the hardware there available for them. And one of the most important things that we can do is provide tools for our students to learn. Having these tools available to them for the future is extremely important. Our priorities should be that our students are able to use this hardware, not have something that's cobbled together from bits and pieces, but have a first-class education. Education is our important thing, and this hardware, the laptops, the Chromebooks, are like the first line that we show to our students and how important that this education is for them. This is, reminder, the 21st century. This is something that should be a no-brainer, I think. Chromebooks need to be available for all of our students, K through 12. And I hope that you make the commitment to do that. Thank you.
Sure she can. Here's 3 minutes. Yeah. Does anyone else want to speak? And just, Mrs. Dixon, just so you know, you get 3 minutes in the beginning and 3 minutes at the end. So if you wanted, you have 3 minutes. Yeah. Anyone can, of course, as long as you have to state your name, first and last, and where you live. You have to be in the school district.
Hi, my name's Julie Boardman. I live here in the school district in Swanksville, probably for 25 years. I have 2 daughters that have come through PV, one graduating this year. Sorry, I don't usually talk in front of people. And my other daughter graduating to be a nurse this year as well. I want to speak about the tennis courts. I'm ecstatic that it's being finally looked at and they want to resurface them, but I'm pushing to do it next year, as we already have plans for the summer and the girls will be on the fields. But the most important part, and as Dr. Russell was stressing tonight, is safety and support of the students. The courts are not safe. We need to prioritize what needs to be done. The gates do not work. They're being held together with cement blocks. The fences, the back fence is tipping in, the backboards don't work, the lights don't work. There's no signage to keep dogs, bikes, and other things off of the courts once they do get resurfaced, so they are safe and they stay new, and we can put the money in the correct places. So I'm just asking that maybe, I know we said it'd be about $4,000 to fix the fences. Maybe we look that way, maybe add a little more to it to fix a few of the other issues, just so that it's safe, not just for the girls and the boys' high school teams, but for all the community that uses it as well. Thank you.
Hi, I will just piggyback again, Mrs. Dixon. Mrs. Boardman pretty much stated, and again, stressing safe and supportive schools. Again, I've been trying just to get picnic benches for our student athletes. They're paying activity fees. They have nothing to sit on. It took me 2 years to get dilapidated, rusty nails, splintered picnic benches removed out of our circles in this lieu of safety of our students and the general public. I've been advocating for the 19 years on those tennis courts to keep them safe and to have better signage and, to have the repairs. We've got, pros coming in from outside clubs giving private lessons. There's a lot of things that do go on when I'm out there, seeing a lot of these things, and wish that we had, even security to patrol. I've had truckers stop and take pictures of our little kids out on the tennis courts taking lessons with me. So I have concerns that run very deep, that far exceed resurfacing the courts. Again, I'm ecstatic that there's money and attention going to be brought to the courts, but not to have pickleball. It is not a sanctioned school sport. It does not belong on our sport field, our tennis facility that has been used and continues to be used as a premier tennis facility here within the PAC and within District 1 tennis. There's other avenues that they can use. The lines, not only is it confusing, they are unsafe. When balls hit the lines, you get a different bounce. You get skids that come off of that. When you get moisture on the courts, those lines remain slicker than the rest of the court surface and do not dry as quickly. So I do know firsthand a lot of the safety concerns. The court surfaces themselves are not slick or unsafe. I am not against the resurfacing of the courts. I'm just for getting a lot of these more minor things that are priorities, safety issues taken care of first and foremost for the general public. And I'm not against pickleball. They're out there using the tennis courts. They do not need to be permanently altered for pickleball users to use our courts. They're out there already. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, seeing none, comments by board members. Ms. Evans-Rocket, Dr. Kolar, Mr. Fountain, Ms. White, Mr. Dorr, Mr. Keenan, Dr. Campley.
I just have two things. I would hope that we can come to some sort of decision sooner rather than later in regards to Chromebooks due to the fact that manufacturing is still an issue with the pandemic, and we want to make sure we get these Chromebooks here and in the hands of students before the school year starts. The other thing I want to consider, for the board to consider, is the fact that the longer we delay the MCIU coming in, that's the longer that students are delayed from getting mental health services that they desperately need. So I would hope that we have the funds set aside through ESSER. I hope that we could get to a point where we can go ahead and move it to consent and approve it so that we can get these mental health services to the students who need them desperately.
Mrs. Mayers? MCI may consent, yeah. Dr. Russell?
No, thank you.
Just note that we did have an executive session today for the purpose of legal, and with that being said, I will roll adjournment. Oh, hold on, I apologize. Notice of the video recording. Don't forget our policy 006.3. Thank you very much. See everyone on Monday night.